Dear everyone, I'm IrishAnimeFan and we've finally made it to the end of the decade! I still can't believe that we all managed to survive this absolute roller coaster that was the past 10 years. And if I were going to recap everything that has happened this decade, then we'd be here for at least another 10 years. However, since this is an anime channel, I can talk about how the anime has developed over the span of these past 10 years. And let me tell you, there's a lot of ground covered. The advent of simulcasting, the companies in the West being more interested in putting their foot into the market, the more widespread distribution of anime films, hell, even the fact that there's a thriving community here on this platform, that all signals to me that anime is even bigger than ever before. Is the model we have now perfect? Well, not really. With the amount of streaming services there are right now, with their different practices and the fact that not everything gets licensed outside the US, sometimes watching anime legally isn't exactly conducive. But things are improving and have come a long way since I started watching anime 10 years ago. Oh god, has it really been that long? While others in the community will reflect on this decade by compiling lists of the best anime, or the worst anime of the decade. I mean, that'd be an interesting list to see, wouldn't it? I'm going to be doing something a bit different here. I'm going to be talking about some of the moments that defined anime in the 2010s. What do I mean by that? Well, it means I'll be looking at different anime that each had a moment from a scene or a specific episode that was significant historically and or culturally, and which sparked widespread conversation within the community. Kind of like those water cooler conversations you would have at work, but, you know, in the comfort of your own home. It isn't necessarily discussing industry news, drama within the community itself, or the glorious memes. It's more like an outlet for thorough discussion of broader topics that were prevalent in anime during the 2010s. So join me as I take a retrospective look back at the anime moments that have defined this decade. But before I start, I want to get a few things out of the way. Firstly, I'm only limiting this to TV series, so no films will be discussed, unfortunately. Secondly, these moments will only be listed in chronological order, so this is not a ranked list by any means, by any sort of a preference, it's just chronological order. And lastly, obviously, there will be spoilers for all the shows discussed in this video. There's probably a good chance that you will know these moments anyway. I'm just putting a warning out there just to give you all a heads up. So, without further ado, let's get on with the list proper, shall we? And what better way to start this list off than right at the beginning? Contrary to popular belief, I don't think anime in the 2010s actually started with, well, the year 2010. Not to say there was anything wrong with that year, far from it. It was the same year that brought us big hitters like Angel Beats, Durarara, High School of the Dead, and among many others. But while it was overall a pretty solid year for anime all around, it wasn't exactly a year that innovated the landscape all that much. It felt more like the last dying breaths of the trends that were prominent during the last decade, rather than the beginning of something new and exciting. Instead, that title belonged to the following year, 2011. It was the same year that brought us Steins Gate, Anohana, Mirai Nikki, Fate Zero, the 2011 remake of Hunter x Hunter, and the series that kicked the whole year off, Puella, Magi, Madoka, Magica. Now, on the surface, Madoka Magica just seems like your average, run-of-the-mill magical girl show, where a group of cute girls with candy-colored hair are gifted with magical powers by an adorable mascot character, and are tasked with protecting the world from evil witches with the power of friendship by their side, and yeah, you get the gist of it. Sure, there are hints of serious subject matter and those creepy psychedelic mixed media sequences, but otherwise it's pretty standard stuff. Even its opening sequence managed to take advantage of its saccharine style, but instead of going down a predictable narrative path, it went in a direction that sparked a turning point for the series in which it could never return from. And it all started with Mami Tomoe's death in episode 3. This scene rocked the community back when it first aired. They were shocked that a prominent character like Mami, who is a badass magical girl who we were getting glimpses of a more vulnerable side at this point, and who won almost every one of those incredibly orchestrated battles, was killed just like that, without as much as a dignified send-off. Sure, this wasn't the last we'd seen of her, but by that point the damage had already been done. It just goes to show that all that talk of being a magical girl being life or death wasn't conjecture. And from here on out, the gravity of that situation became even greater. Viewers swiftly caught on to the fact that this anime's cutesy front was all just a deception. They also picked up on the many critiques towards the magical girl genre, and noticed that many of the cliches and tropes of the genre are either flipped on its head or filtered through a dark and grittier lens. As a result, many fans started labeling Madoka Magica as a deconstruction of the magical girl genre. With what we know now about magical girl anime, the point doesn't really hold that much weight as it used to, but at the time, it was revolutionary. And I'd argue that it was because of Madoka Magica's subversive tendencies that the genre got a newfound appreciation within the community, that it can challenge its audience and expose them to ideas and concepts that would have never dawned upon them if it was just any other magical girl title. It's this kind of innovation that makes Puella Magi Madoka Magica the series that truly began to represent anime during the decade. If there was one series that pretty much ruled this decade, it had to be Sword Art Online. From the moment it came onto our screens, it has enjoyed massive success and popularity. While not strictly an isekai or a show in another world, nor being the first of its kind, it was largely responsible for reigniting its flame during the 2010s. It also ushered in a newfound mainstream appreciation for anime. However, with such an incredible rise in popularity comes equally increasing derision. Yes, while there were people that did like it at the time, since then what was once a small group of fervent dissenters shining a light on its most notable flaws, has swayed almost the entire community into believing that not only was SAO not as good as we once thought, but it was actually objectively terrible. And that hatred for Sword Art Online all stems back to the series' first instance of backlash, Alfheim Online. Despite the reputation the series has now, people still look back fondly on the Aincrad arc. Sure, it has its problems, but it's still pretty entertaining and even has some decent isolated moments. The same cannot be said for Alfheim. What the actual hell happened here? Between the end of Aincrad and the finale, its writing was on the wall. And it was very shoddy indeed. From its mismanagement of its story and characters, to suggestions of incest and tentacle rape. Do I even have to explain why those last two are so deplorable? I know it's kind of cheating to put an entire arc on here, so I'm just going to use episode 24 as its placeholder, because after the mess that came before, this episode leaves us feeling sour. As if Asuna's character being reduced to a promising kick-ass heroine to a damsel in distress wasn't bad enough character development for her. Now she's the subject of sexual abuse at the hands of creeps McGeek over here. Why did they decide to add these scenes? Just because. And to add further insult to injury, you know how Kirito ends up saving the day in the end? A blatant deus ex machina is handed to him by the creator of SAO, both figuratively and literally, that allows him to bend the game design to his own will, engaging in one of the last tensionless sword fights in the anime, puts an end to ALO, and I feel nothing but emptiness inside after watching it. You may have noticed I didn't go into much detail with this episode's flaws, and that's because the points I'm bringing up here aren't new. The anime community as a whole are acutely aware of Sword Art Online's problems, because they keep being brought up. Hating Sword Art Online has become a cultural activity in its own right, and it will stay like this for as long as they continue to pump out new seasons of the anime. And as much fun as bashing SAO is, I would also like to commend the individuals that constructively tried to fix the show's problems. Namely the folks over at Something Witty Entertainment, and their hilarious SAO Abridged series that many consider to be a better project than the original. Yeah, while SAO itself has just become a dead horse at this point, to the anime community itself, it's our dead horse. As I've mentioned before, SAO opened the floodgates for a new wave of isekai anime. Some shows following it expanded upon the trapped in the video game world type scenario, but over time isekai became known as a shorthand for fantasy anime with some like JRPG-like mechanics thrown into it. It has reached the point where the more popular it got, the more frequent their output became with every passing years, and it shows no signs of slowing down at this point. Hell, its popularity even coalesced in the spin-off crossover series Isekai Quartet, featuring some of its most popular IPs, such as Konosuba, Overlord, the Saga of Tanya the Evil, and the anime we'll be focusing on today, ReZero. Even in an already saturated market, ReZero was able to stand out from the crowd, thanks to its Groundhog Day-like premise in which every time main character Subaru Natsuki dies, he responds to a point before his death, so he can change the outcome of not only himself, but also the lives of those around him. This in turn leads to some of the series' most harrowing scenes, with Subaru being subjected to a tremendous amount of death and suffering based on the decisions he has made, coupled with some of the most messed up shit that the plot throws his way. As a result, Subaru is broken to a point beyond repair, and is on the verge of just giving up entirely. That is until episode 18, in which Rem initially tries to talk him out of it. And the rest of the episode focuses on this conversation alone. There's not much else to this episode than that, but the exchange that they do end up having is so heartfelt. From Subaru blaming himself for all the atrocities that happened around him, heavily criticizing his faults as a person and spiraling down into a pit of self-deprecation, to Rem consoling him and reminding him of all the good he's done for the people around him. The emotional apex in the episode is when Rem finally reaches to Subaru by explaining how he saved her from darkness, and in return gives him the strength to get back on his feet and to start over from zero. It's a beautiful and triumphant moment that provides so much catharsis, not just for our characters, but also the viewer as well, as the journey that we have taken with them finally has a satisfying payoff. Well, not quite. For you see, the main thing that fans have taken away from this episode is, well, this.
Rem.
What is it?
Emilia is the one I love.
I know.
Where do I even begin with this? I'll start by saying that I understand where Subaru is coming from. Emilia was the first person that helped him after being transported into this new world, and because of that, she's the main drive for Subaru's motivation to do what he does. Even after she forbidden from seeing her, he never lost sight of what Emilia means to him. But this is Rem we're talking about, one of the few people to stick by Subaru's side, someone who has risked her life to save him on multiple counts, was given screen time for us to get attached to her, and was effectively spilling her heart out in front of the man she loves. And you're telling me that she gets rejected after all she's done for him? I mean, no wonder the fans were mad about it. Even if choosing Rem in the end would completely undermine what the episode was going for, fans were still willing to overlook that just to get the ending that they desperately wanted. It was this moment where the best girl/boy arguments became permanent fixtures in anime discourse. It just goes to show that fans are just as passionate about their waifus and husbandos as they are about everything else that the medium has to offer. If there was an aspect of anime that hasn't been handled with as much care as I was like, it would have to be LGBTQ+ representation. Now, don't get me wrong, there have been plenty of examples of queer anime characters over the years, but when it comes to positive and healthy representation, that's where my problem arises. The fetishization that plague a lot of the couples that fall under the yaoi and yuri tags, series that frequently utilizes subtext but don't actually follow through with it, also known as queerbaiting, or the few positive examples that do exist were either erased due to US censorship or just weren't popular enough to garner that much attention. The setbacks made regarding the discussion can be attributed to Japan's own warped perception of what a healthy same-sex relationship actually looks like, pandering to a certain demographic rather than depicting a more natural and compassionate love. This is where Yuri on Ice comes into all of this. Initially, it does have that sense of queerbaiting attached to it, and presents the student-teacher relationship of Yuri Katsuki and Viktor Nikiforov, respectively, as following the set roles seen in many yaoi stories. If the forward nature of Viktor manipulating the timidness of Yuri in doing what he wants was the main dynamic in their relationship going forward, it would have been a dangerous move to play. Fortunately, it doesn't go down that route, as the mutual bond they both share for each other continues to grow, but the question of whether that connection would evolve into something deeper was still in the air for the fans. And all our questions were answered in the form of episode 7, as after Yuri's emotionally strenuous skating performance, this happens. It was official. Their relationship has been cemented into the canon. Viewers could not believe what they had just witnessed. And it wasn't just a one-off occurrence either, as they later end up getting engaged and we get flashbacks of their first encounter, showing the little sparks of that first love. Now, as much as myself and many others were treating this as a moment of celebration, keep in mind that there were still some suspicions about this scene. Many people had made the argument that the kiss was censored by the broadcast company and that the existence of an implied kiss isn't enough to justify it as a significant moment. And while they may have a point, I would say that if the physical kiss itself wasn't the focus, it's instead placed on what it means for both Victor and Yuri. There's a sense of equality in that relationship that, while the show was not the first to depict, is something that fans haven't seen portrayed in such a long time. Its way of normalizing homosexual relationships paved the way for other series like Bloom Into You and Given to continue promoting more positive LGBTQ+ representation in the medium. It allowed Banana Fish to finally get adapted into an anime, and in correlation with the growing movement pushing for equal marriage rights in Japan, I'd argue that it's a step in the right direction. The show claimed it was born to make history, and I believe they most certainly did that. The internet has affected the landscape of not just anime, but media in general. The aspect I'd like to focus on for this video, however, is the relationship between creators and their fans. Social media has made it possible for greater engagement between those two parties. Creators could interact with their audience by relaying their creative intent, and the fanbase in turn would express their opinions on said matters. But perhaps they communicated those feelings a bit too strongly. There have been many cases of where fan reception on one side, usually regarding the quality of its writing, has become so extreme that it borders on harassment. And anime was unfortunately no exception to this. There have been several instances of this occurring within the community this past decade, and one of the most high-profile cases is what happened with Darling in the FRANXX. Now, before we talk about that scene, a bit of context is needed. After the battle in the garden that left Zero Two nearly killing Hiro in an uncontrolled fit of rage, she starts to flash back to her childhood as a lab experiment and her brief escape from all that. The reason for her fleeting glimpse of freedom was because of a young Hiro taking a keen interest in her, and after some quality bonding time, she realizes that they really are made for each other and wants to talk to him all about this when he wakes up. Problem is, however, is after she's left Hiro in a critical condition, she has to rejoin her previous squad for the next big mission, and Ichigo actively prevents her from seeing him because, in her eyes, she is a dangerous threat. A couple of misunderstandings and plot contrivances later, Zero Two goes into berserk mode and attacks the rest of Squad 13. Then Hiro shows up and, shocked by what he's witnessed, calls her a monster for what she's done. As she is taken away, Hiro decides at the last minute to go after her, but is then stopped once again by Ichigo. She then goes in for the kill and kisses him, and confesses her feelings as he watches Zero Two being whisked away from him. In Ichigo's defense, once again, I understand where she's coming from. She's known Hiro for all her life, and has learned about and developed her own feelings towards him. It's only natural that any hazard that he faces deeply concerns her. Acting as the leader of Squad 13, she was doing what she thought was right and was completely in character. But that obviously wasn't what many viewers thought, as this controversial moment led to the writers, producers, and even the voice actors to receive harassment and death threats. The best reason I can find for why certain fans reacted like this was because it got in the way of the relationship between Hiro and Zero Two. Following this major revelation, which prompted more insight into their earnest interconnected bond that was explored in the previous episode, having the rest of the group, and by proxy the writing staff, meddling and interrupting the natural pace of their progression for some cheap, unearned melodrama left some people unhappy, and that kiss was the straw that broke the camel's back. But still, harassing the creators over it is taking things a bit too far. A lot of people were annoyed by Rem's rejection in ReZero, but I don't remember anyone resorting to death threats because of it. Social media platforms have made it possible to generate conversations between the industry officials and their audience. However, this moment showed the ugly side of fan culture that we've seen all too often during this decade. A site that damns the people who make it because of a creative decision that they didn't like, even if it's something as minute as two characters temporarily not being together. The common procedure for telling whether an anime they're currently watching is any good or not is a thing known as the 3-episode rule, as the viewer gives the respective series 3 episodes to prove its worth. However, with the number of anime airing per season increasing, some have relied on the formula less and less over the years. In an age where anime is constantly vying for our attention, in order for an anime to make any kind of lasting impact in the current landscape, it needs to hook its viewers as early as episode 1, and no other anime made quite a first impression as Goblin Slayer. From the outset, there didn't seem to be anything particularly special about Goblin Slayer. It takes place in a fantasy world where a young priestess embarks on an adventure when she decides to tag along with a party of fellow rookie adventurers to hunt some goblins. However, as they enter into their first cave, the real horror begins as they are attacked by a horde of goblins from behind. The members hold their own initially, but their inexperience leads to a gruesome fate. The mage girl is poisoned and killed, the sword boy gets beaten to death, and the fighter girl gets raped by goblins. All in the first half of the first episode, mind you. Obviously the priestess ends up getting saved by the titular Goblin Slayer who, you guessed it, slays a bunch of goblins, even partakes in child murder. But it's clear that the main point of derision comes from that prior scene. This caused a lot of outrage within the community and firmly split the discourse into 2 camps. The first stating that they found the scene to be too graphic and violent in its presentation, while the other group, mainly comprising of Goblin Slayer fans, claims that the other group are just overly sensitive and asks if they've ever watched a dark fantasy series before. Whatever side you fell on when it came to this upsetting scene, it prompted Crunchyroll to retroactively place a content warning for not only this episode, but for every episode in the series. But this wasn't just a one-off occasion, as this same discourse pervaded into the SAO's Alicization arc. Same thing for Rising of the Shield Hero in the winter of 2019, which had a similar controversy in its first episode, along with its contentious views on slavery. Whether it was intentional or not, Goblin Slayer kickstarted a debate about ethics in anime, how to go about conveying it, and how it relates to audience reception. Maybe that's being a bit too generous considering that the atmosphere surrounding it is incredibly hostile, but as long as series of this nature keeps getting produced and adapted, this debate will continue to prevail. If there is one subset of anime that has enjoyed immense success during this decade, it's idol anime. Sure, it's always been popular since the early 80s as an expansion of Japan's own pervasive idol culture, but it just exploded in popularity during the 2010s. And it makes sense too. Idols harnessed a transmedia appeal that catered across an array of different platforms, from TV series, films, music videos, audio CDs, manga, and of course, the concerts which encourage constant engagement with its loyal fanbase. But instead of discussing the impact of properties like Love Live, Idolmaster, or any other of its variants, instead I'm going to be talking about Zombieland Saga. Zombieland Saga is a refreshing take on the idol genre, as its mixture with the zombie genre allows the series to creatively draw attention to the inherent problems and issues that plague the idol industry itself. Yet at the same time, it's able to be a loving send-up of the genre too, which could have undermined what the series was going for, but thanks to its endless charm, hilarious writing, and lovable cast of characters, Zombieland Saga was able to hit it right out of the park. And the shining star who provided a lot of the show's heart was Lily Hoshikawa. Get it? Because her zombie design has a star on the head and her heart is literally beating out of her chest, and you know, I returned from my absence after all this time and these are the jokes I come up with? Gosh, no wonder nobody watches me. Before we got to her backstory, Lily was presented as an ordinary little girl who was happy, high-spirited, and liked cute things. However, it is revealed in episode 8 that Lily is trans. She rejects her dead name, and the reason for why Lily died in the first place was because of the extreme mental distress she suffered from discovering a strand of growing facial hair. After everyone's initial shock and the slightly problematic banter that follows, everyone is accepting of her identity, and the revelation of Lily's transness only serves as the context for the overall dynamic between Lily and her father. So her being trans doesn't define her. So while her gender identity wasn't the primary focus of the episode, For some viewers, it was a deal breaker for them. While many fans have been supportive of her, there was still a portion of the community that weren't on board with it. Some even claimed that the inclusion of Lily being trans was deliberately made up by Crunchyroll without the creator's knowledge or consent, whereas the opposing group denounces that by pointing out that the original translation is even more explicit. Then there was that time where an image of Lily holding up a gun and saying "shut the fuck up, TERF" made its way into a UK Parliament meeting. That really did happen. The past few years really have been a strange time indeed. Finally, this fed into a broader conversation regarding the status of the term trans, where the term has been called into question by a number of people in the community for being problematic and is a slur against trans people. There are certain individuals that have toyed with the idea of instigating a movement similar to Gamergate or Comicsgate in the anime world, and while that pipe dream isn't likely going to happen anytime soon, there's no doubt that the events that have emerged over the past couple of years has divided and ruptured the Western anime community in such a way that the damage it's caused is almost irreversible. Okay, let's lighten the mood a bit for our last entry by talking about something fun and something that has always been a driving force in anime's popularity. That is, shonen anime. Now, shonen action anime has been popular for many decades, but like many things in the 2010s, it underwent significant changes. While One Piece was and still is thriving within the community, we also saw two of shonen's biggest mainstays, Bleach and Naruto, come to an end. In some ways, this marked the end of an era. Fortunately, that hole left by the stepping down of the old guard paved the way for a new wave of titles that captured the attention of many fans. Series such as, but are not limited to, Attack on Titan, Black Clover, Food Wars, Seven Deadly Sins, and of course we can't forget about My Hero Academia. The JoJo's! And 2019 saw no shortage of great shonen, with hit series such as The Promised Neverland, Dr. Stone, and the show that was on everybody's radar the past year, Demon Slayer, Kimetsu no Yaiba. Since the series just finished airing a few months ago, it's probably too early to tell what kind of long-term effect it will have on the industry. But as it stands now, Demon Slayer is an absolute triumph for the medium. It's a series that excels on every front, particularly in its simple yet tightly constructed plot, and its mind-bendingly good animation courtesy of Studio Ufotable, all of which are encompassed in the emotional battle between Tanjiro and Rui in episode 19. While the physical fight itself is incredible, what makes it work so well is the thematic build-up, mainly the clashing ideals that both opponents have regarding family. For the sake of time, I won't bog you down with too much of my analysis here, but the main crux of the conflict is the contrast between Rui's selfish disregard of his family and Tanjiro holding on to what remains of his family, that being Nezuko. This fight tests both of those principles through its shifting stakes, which naturally gives us the outcome of Tanjiro and Nezuko banding together to defeat Rui. While it is straightforward, it is executed with such a heartfelt intensity that only shonen anime can produce, that keeps the audience engrossed in its heart-pounding action. Which brings us to the animation in this episode, and my god, it's a sight to behold. The blending of 2D and 3D animation style leads to some extremely dynamic camera work, expressive and fluid movement, and ethereal particle effects that sport a barrage of vibrant color seen in its jaw-dropping climax. It's an absolute spectacle. Even though Ufotable has been accused of tax evasion, if all of that money went into making this scene look as beautiful as it does, then almost all is forgiven. Almost. This all culminated in an ending sequence that will go down in anime history as one to remember. The episode had affected a lot of its viewers, including the original mangaka, who expressed their excitement about it on Twitter. Speaking of Twitter, the episode had garnered so much praise that it was actually trending worldwide. It's not often that you get to see an anime receive this amount of attention, but that's just how much power and influence the medium has on people who watch it. While social media can be responsible for hosting harmful and hostile messages, the inverse of that is also true. When the industry suffered some of its most devastating low points, fans were quick to respond with messages of their love and support to help its creators get through these troubling times. For as much stigma that surrounds and is present within the community, the passion we have for the anime that we care about is undeniable. These moments are why I still come back to anime even after all these years. Even though I've covered a wide array of anime and themes across this video, I know I haven't covered everything that happened this decade. So I would like to hear from you guys. What were some of the anime that made your decade? Leave your answers in the comment section below. I'd be really interested to find out what you think. Anyway, that does it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hit the like button if you did, hit subscribe to be notified whenever I upload a new video, and follow me on Twitter at IrishAnimeFan for updates and other miscellaneous things I happen to tweet. Links in the description below. I've been IrishAnimeFan, and I cannot wait to show you what I have in store for this channel in the new year. Until next time... Oh yeah. Those things exist. Well, it was fun while it lasted. Slán go.